Have you ever wondered why we have a horde of people in their 20s that are leaving the education system just left there scratching their bums, just trying to figure out what they actually want to do with their life? When in reality, you would imagine that the system would facilitate this entire process. And the reason for that is because in school, you're taught to conform. You're conditioned to conform to the arbitrary hurdles that the system puts you through. And unfortunately, things like critical thinking and stepping outside of your comfort zone isn't really encouraged as much as it should be. Now, before I carry on with the video, I know I've got a pretty strong opinion about this entire topic. And I just want to say that I understand how lucky and fortunate I am to be receiving an education, especially in a country like this. And for me, being able to become an engineer, if that adds any sort of relevance or credibility to my viewpoint. But we can't deny with the fact that there are a lot of holes within our current education system, and it hasn't really kept up with the constant changes around us, such as the advent of AI. Now, bringing the focus back to myself and the reasons as to why I've got this kind of opinion, I just want to start off by saying, growing up, I was honestly a very curious kid who wanted answers to the reasons as to why things in the world were the way they were, especially with the standardized education system that we've all gone through. But the more I went through the system, the more questions I had, and there were certain things in the education system which didn't really make much logical sense to me. And the thing was, you could say I was one of those decently smart South Asian kids growing up, but I also had a bit of ADHD tendencies where I would honestly struggle to focus on particular tasks. So what I would do to myself is kind of gaslight myself into thinking that this piece of work in front of me was like life or death. I even remember just telling myself in my mind that if I don't do this work, then I'm not going to be able to get a job in the future and I'm going to be a failure in life. And of course, in hindsight, this was a sign of low self-esteem, but it was honestly the only way where I could actually motivate myself to actually doing the work. And I started to develop a mindset and started learning habits, which helped me tremendously in my GCSEs and A-levels. It's a method I'm pretty sure if you're a student, you've probably done it at some point or another, which is the cram and forget method. It's pretty self-explanatory by its name, but essentially it's when a student tries to cram and just memorize as much information as possible right before an exam. And then they do the exam and then they forget all of the information a day after the exam. This causes students to be over-reliant on being ordered what to do to pass a particular exam to get a good grade, rather than being an independent thinker and a genuine learner. And I'm also sure that you can agree that school is far more than just clustering as much information into a student's brain, but instead it's an opportunity for a student to be learning, discovering, and being able to socialize with other individuals who are at a similar age. Because I'm going to be completely honest, it's only one of the few environments where you're around other people who are at a similar age. This makes it so that colleges and universities have essentially monopolized the socialization of the youth. As say if you decided to go into an apprenticeship scheme rather than university, what you would quickly realize is that you're surrounded by other people who are in the 30s, 40s and 50s, rather than people who are at a similar age. And it may be harder to connect with these kinds of people as they're simply in a different stage of life with kids and everything. I mean, to be honest, university is like the only place where you can get a free pass on getting absolutely pissed beyond belief, taking questionable substances and still coming out of the other end, being congratulated for getting through uni. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you do this within university, people will say you have a vibrant social life, but the rules completely change once you get out of university as people start questioning the sort of life decisions that you're making. Bro, they will just literally ask you, what are you doing with your life? And don't get me wrong, don't let what I've just said stop you from doing certain things, because there's nothing wrong with going on a night out on occasions. But it just goes to show that the sort of culture that university has, it just breeds a lazier mindset which doesn't quite prepare you for the next stage of life. Because what universities used to be were bringing in the brightest minds together to further the research and development in a given topic. And of course, back in the day, they also had their own issues with inequality and not letting in certain genders. But I feel like universities have become more of the norm to go more so for the experience rather than the degree, which ties into the whole youth monopolization thing I was talking about earlier. And maybe if you're like me, you're in your 20s or even 30s, bro, this ain't even an age thing, but it's just a lot harder to get and keep a job nowadays. And this is especially true if you are a fresh graduate or looking for an entry-level role. And even if you do have a job, the possibility of getting laid off is a lot more common nowadays. And it's not necessarily trying to get a job, but the job which gives you a decent level of income whilst utilizing your talents in the right fields. But unfortunately, most people end up feeling extremely lost, and a lot of people end up taking time out to quote unquote find themselves, essentially pushing the burden of becoming an adult and actually going into the workforce because it's a socially accepted thing to do to, say, grow travel. But to be honest, I don't even blame anyone for this because life has gotten so much harder. But we just have to stop and think to ourselves, for a student to go through the education system for a decade or so, you would have expected for that person to actually, done the whole figuring out life thing, right? Which is the exact problem. And you've got authoritative figures in the education system who are pressuring people who are 16 or 18 to make major life decisions on which sector they want to go into. And bearing in mind, as a guy, for example, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical part of your brain, isn't even developed until you're 25. And it really doesn't help with the fact that there is an emphasis on every incremental age gap that you go through. Like, okay, you're 14, you're doing your GCSEs. Okay, now you're 16, you're doing your A-levels. Bro, you're 18 now, you're going to university. But as soon as you enter your 20s, age really doesn't matter anymore, as everyone is essentially on their own journey. So now the question I'm going to bring forward, as stupid as this question may sound, which is, what is actually the purpose of the education system? Because from what I've described, it clearly has nothing to do with a student becoming an individual and trying to figure out their own skills, talents, and interests, because otherwise we wouldn't have this quote-unquote cattle of young people who are trying to figure out life. This is actually a leftist approach to education, which is being played out in certain countries such as Finland, where, for example, the education is a lot more child-centered and the teachers act more so as facilitators for the child's self-discovery and growth, rather than being authoritative figures. This is a complete contrast to what we see here in the West, in the UK, for example, where we've got parents who are stressing out of their minds, bro, as to where they should send their kids to nursery so that they could get to Oxford. And some would say that this is more of a utilitarian approach to education, where it focuses on the shaping of the child to become a fit worker for the labour market. But the caveat to this utilitarian approach, which is the type of thinking that I came to the conclusion to make this video, is why are we all doing this studying in the first place then? And let me elaborate further, because as a kid, if you comprehended that the purpose of education was to teach you things which would be useful for real life, you naturally start to question where all of those quadratic formulas to the essay analysis stuff that you've done on Romeo and Juliet come into play. And of course, the same order response that you get is you have to study to pass an exam so that you can get a job, which in my opinion is honestly a very depressing way of thinking about studying. Because let me put it like this, right? Why is there no education on, say, health, for example? I mean, the most that they taught you, they didn't even teach you, but they just showed you that pyramid, as well as that whole phrase of eat an apple a day to keep the doctor away, or that bollocks. There is also no mention about the importance of getting your micronutrients in, from vitamins A, B, C, basically half the alphabet. And we know for a fact that most people are nutrient deficient, because most people's diets consist of processed meals which can be quickly heated up in the microwave. And many people rely on energy drinks to get them through the assignments. And it's the reason why a lot of people struggle to maintain their health and fitness when they go through their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Bro, the foundation of the knowledge about health and fitness isn't even there, unless you yourself go out of your own way to self-teach yourself these things. And we also can't forget to mention the 1 hour of PE that you're forced to do every single week. Bro, that's pathetic. And what about the lack of knowledge on basic financial literacy? I mean, most of us were not really taught about taxes or how to manage our finances properly, especially in the climate that we're in right now, where everything's just so expensive. And probably one of the most important and relevant things of all, which is how to combat mental health issues for students who are feeling those feelings of depression and anxiety right before they do exams. Which actually reminds me of one thing. I was one of the many A-level students who kind of got screwed with the thing that happened in 2020, where I wasn't actually able to sit my exams. And I ended up getting my A-levels during August, I believe, where I'm pretty sure the government used a sort of algorithm to predict what teachers would have given us if we were to sit the exam. And from the top of my head, I'm pretty sure there was a stat going around saying that almost 40% of A-level students were downgraded. And I know this has happened to a lot of people, but including myself, a lot of people just ended up missing out on the university of their choice. I mean, after the backlash, the government decided to use centre-assessed grades to try and fix the problem, but at that point it was already too late. And to be honest, I'm not particularly salty or anything, because this was like 5 years ago. But it's just the way that the government went about this particular situation. It was a complete mess, let's just put it like that.